So I'm joined by Benjamin, who worked with me on building his recruitment business. Hi, Benjamin. Tell us a little bit about your business then.
Ooh, good question. I suppose it makes more sense for me to start with where it sort of began and how I got to where I am now, really. I worked for quite a few years within the property world, so mainly within the functions of an estate agency. So this was going back about 15 years ago now. So at the time, I was quite a frustrated manager of an estate agency office, working for quite a large corporate firm that very much had very strict parameters about how you can operate and what you can and can't do. And I think I felt very much sort of trapped at the time. The key failing of my own branch at the time was purely down to getting decent staff on board, that we weren't usually involved within the recruitment process. It would be as simple as Monday morning you get a new recruit who has no experience or understanding of the industry, and we're just expected as the manager to develop and train them. But the problem was, so many people thought a state agency was very different to what the reality of a state agency was, that it is a sales and target sort of driven industry. So we went through a lot of stuff which does affect your business within the sector. So one thing, I remember having a really frustrating conversation with my area manager and just basically saying, Dave, I literally need decent, experienced people. You keep giving me, 17, 18-year-olds out of school with no experience. They last 5 minutes because they don't want a sales job. And then we're back to square one, and it's not great from a customer point of view. So he said to me, well, I'm happy for you to have a look at some options. And that's exactly what I did. So I went out, I think it was a Sunday sort of afternoon when estate agents used to operate on Sundays, and went mystery shopping the competition, and ended up basically headhunting somebody, having a coffee chat with them and managing to job offer them, recruit them, get them on board, which a friend of mine who worked in recruitment at the time, I remember going for a beer with him and sort of having a bit of a laugh, that he said, well, you've basically done what I do on a day-to-day basis. The only difference is I would have charged your company about £3,000 for the privilege of that, which sort of got me thinking at the time, am I in the wrong job here? And that's where the recruitment business that I now have grown today originated from. So it certainly had some frustrating times. We've just about managed to get through the recession, and obviously I think the recession nearly killed a lot of recruitment agents, but with us recruiting within the construction world, property related sectors, it was pretty hard times, but we've managed to get through it, and that's where we are today. That I'm glad I made the leap of faith initially, but I think I've also learned an awful lot about business that, well, I didn't know anything about business before this. I was very naive to it, but it's been a great journey so far.
So there'll be people listening to this interview that are considering working with me. Perhaps you can just share what drew you to working with me.
I suppose what drew me towards yourself was, we as a business, I think we'd had some great years of trading. I mean, the economy was just growing in the sort of early to mid 2000s, and then the recession came out of nowhere, and it did nearly cripple us as a business. But thankfully, we did manage to come out the other side, probably smarter for it. But I think with a bit of a struggling business model, really, that we'd grown it to, I think it was it about 23 people when we initially spoke, and we were turning over just shy of about 3 million. Trying to get it over that level was just, it seemed impossible. We were sort of getting close to the 3 million, coming back down again, building it back up again, falling back down. And it was causing problems within the business, really, that we were that focused on trying to, I think when I set up the business, I thought, well, every consultant should be able to do at least 150 grand, times that by 50 people, hey ho, I've got a wonderful business. And I think we'd grown quite fast in a way that I wasn't expecting, and probably not having the business acumen that maybe I feel that I have now. It reached that sort of almost a sort of a wall there. How do we get past this? Because it's now starting to, we've got so much expenditure within our business. How do we actually get past where we are at the moment? Because some months we're running at bloody big losses, and then other months it's fantastic profit. But there was no consistency and no continued growth. I think the growth that we had was very reflective of some of the clients we had, that we'd been on the journey with them from an early stage, and they'd successfully grown their businesses, and off the back of it we were getting the recruitment, which was great. But I think they'd sort of grown to a level that they were comfortable with, and we were sort of at a point, well, how do we move forward? How do we turn 3 into 6, and how do we turn 6 then into 12, and so on and so forth? I just wanted to keep growing it, and it was just a very frustrating 2 years of sort of getting up to 3, coming down again, and not really moving forward to the level that I suppose I personally wanted it to be. And I very much felt that I just did not have the expertise to do it, and having tried to recruit an MD figurehead within the business again just didn't work, unfortunately. So I don't know whether that was a failing of myself. I should be good at recruitment, but that person just didn't really great at running the day-to-day. But in terms of growing a business, it's a tough thing, and it's a tough market out there for any small medium sort of enterprise company. So I think obviously I was introduced to you through a mutual sort of friend. We met at a networking event, and I think obviously you've been there, done it before within the recruitment sector. You obviously know how to grow and expand businesses, not just within recruitment. But I think because you've done it within recruitment before, it was quite appealing as to why I actually wanted to work with you. I think you clearly know how to grow businesses, because we've obviously moved forward quite considerably compared to what we were beforehand. But I've never stopped wanting to keep growing and keep being bigger and better. And obviously I think you've managed to do that successfully with a number of sort of investments and companies that you've had in the past. So it sort of got to that point. It wasn't an easy decision to make, but I'm glad we did partner up in the end, because the business now has come on leaps and bounds, and suddenly it's a completely different beast to what it was a few years ago.
So, looking at your recruitment business, what would you say were the key challenges that you were facing before you got involved working with me?
I think the key sort of challenges, as I sort of touched on just a moment ago, it was definitely towards how we get the business from where it was, which in a way I think timing played a lot of help and assistance in growing our business to where we'd got, purely based on what was going on in the world of property and construction. Obviously it was hugely growing at one period of time not so long ago, and the clients that we got on board had significantly grown with that as well. So we were fortunate that because we were good at what we were doing, we were the only headhunter at the time within what we were doing, so we were providing great quality calibre of individuals into our clients' business. But when they stopped growing, it's kind of like our business stopped growing, and then we tried to sort of expand in other ways and branch out into new sectors, but it become very, very tricky to actually do that. And you'd think the larger you get, sometimes the easier the growth becomes, where I think the reality is it actually gets harder the more you grow. But you get to a certain level, I think it's probably down to ourselves, myself and management team. I think we'd all hold our hands up and say we didn't really have business acumen, so to speak. We didn't understand what difference certain things you can implement into a business, and how certain structures can really make such a big difference, and also how we actually manage cash flow and accounting and legal infrastructures to make the business more profitable and easier to run. It just became so much easier overnight once we dealt with those issues. And I think before, we sort of had an idea of what those issues were, but maybe far too consumed with the business, where I think, having worked with yourself now, I now view business in a very different way. And I think once we really sort of identified what the issues were, the solutions now just seem quite straightforward in a way. But it's brilliant that we've managed to learn them and implement them in the business, because it's made fantastic monumental changes, of course.
So the main issue you were facing was growth. Then perhaps you can just walk through what we did.
Yeah, I mean, the main issue was very much growth. It was plateaued, would probably be the word, at the level that it got. And I think the key thing that I probably learned at the time was I was too much involved within the business. So if I was not there, the business didn't run and perform, without sounding sort of egotistical, but I had to be there. And even when we were employing 20 odd people, I was still there, half of the time, being a recruitment consultant as well, picking up the phone to candidates, clients, thinking I was being a great manager, leading from the front, showing I do exactly what you guys do here in the office. I think it was slightly good management, but in terms of when you want to grow a business, I also learned it's really bad practice, because the more involved I was, the less I could view on the whole operation of the company, the strategic planning of moving forward. And there are only so many hours in the day, aren't there? And we've all got great skills, expertise within different things. I think what I probably learned is that by being so involved and consumed within the business, it's kind of like you have this perfectionist sort of mentality, that you want to fix all the problems, and this baby that you've grown from just nothing to what it's become now, and you care about it, you're passionate about the brand, you want everything to be absolutely fantastic, you want 100% great reviews, you want all your clients and candidates to just be so happy. And I think business just doesn't work like that. But I think when I was sort of taught by yourself to detach myself and my mentality from the business, and start looking at the growth side of things and not the operational day-to-day, what goes on. Obviously it's important, but there are people that are very good at doing that. When we obviously employed Jonathan into the role to do that, he is fantastic. From an operational point of view, you will not find somebody better to run the day-to-day sort of business of what we do. But obviously that then frees me up to think about how I can look at the growth side of the business and move forward and find expertise to be able to deliver these potential ideas that you and I obviously now come up with. I think if anything, having Jonathan on board doing what I used to do, he actually does it much better and is maximising on what we already had in a much better way. It's just what he was naturally born to do. So it was a big thing for me to do. It was kind of like giving the control over, a bit like I remember I sort of use the analogy of when my daughter first went to school. It just made me think sort of like, oh, is she ready to go to school? I've been the parent here for so long. I'm kind of handing the reins over to someone else. This is a horrible thing. And it's very much been like that with the business. But I think after a few weeks, and you kind of realise, well, the business is still going without me, and if anything, it's actually performing better. It kind of makes you realise where the issues you've been facing, I suppose ultimately in the past for a long period of time. But then we could really focus on the growth of the business and getting the best people on board, starting to look at acquisitions. It's been a great journey since I've done that. I know hindsight's a wonderful thing, but I really wish I'd done it, 10 years earlier, because I just think the growth side of things has become so easy now. We're running at ridiculous profit levels. It's just fantastic to really enjoy the business again and not be worrying about cash flow on a day-to-day basis.
So I wouldn't say that there was anything rocket science around what you've just described there, Benjamin. So I guess really you could have perhaps done this without me.
If I had my time again, turn the clock back 15 odd years or so, would I do anything differently? Probably would have done this much sooner. But I think from what I've learned, from day one, I would have structured the business in a completely different way. So you are set up for when you start growing. And I think growing's an ambiguous word, really, but that means anything from the first ever employee that you might employ, having the right infrastructure in place from a legal accounting point of view. You set yourself up in the correct manner to obviously grow. So I would have definitely implemented that from day one. Obviously, I've been on the journey with you and learnt a lot, but would I have tried to do this myself? Probably not. I think the skills and expertise that you've obviously brought to the table have made all of this possible. I think it would have taken me a lot longer to do it on my own, just because I don't have the skills and expertise that yourself and your business partners that you brought to the table have managed to add in terms of my business, and where the business has got to in the timescale that it has within the last couple of years or so. It's growth that I didn't realise would ever be possible within a business. Really not at all. I think there's very few companies that do seem to go from sort of a smallish level to a large level like we have in, well, I think it was less than 2 years, the entire growth from where we were to where we are now. Um, it's a real eye-opener, to be fair, and I really hope anybody that's in the same situation that I am, whether it's earlier on than I was or whether they're at the level that I was when we first started speaking, if you want to actually earn decent money and grow a business in a very simple method, then they need to be having conversations with people like yourself. It's just not possible. I think most people set up businesses because they're probably quite good at what they do as a day job. They think, well, stop making money for someone else and do it for myself. But unless you've been to maybe Harvard Business School or something, I don't think these possibilities exist within most companies and most people's understandings of business and what business should be about. But it's completely transformed this business overnight, which it's the best decision I've ever made ultimately.
And you mentioned about acquisitions. Just tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think if there's anyone out there that is me a few years ago, I think I would like to think that it wasn't just me that thought of business the way I did at the time, which to grow a business, you naturally have to just keep putting monies back into it, keep getting great people on board, adding to your team. The more people you've got, the more money you make. I think the thing you miss is probably the more expenditure you've got. And, you might find the world's best individual that can add a lot of money into your bottom line and employ them tomorrow, but you might not see the results for them for 6 months. And sometimes 6 months comes along and they're out the door and on to the next company, next opportunity, and you don't always get the return. And to grow a large company, it takes years and years. Some of the people I know working within recruitment, and because of the acquisitions, people that we've talked to, um, you can see they've been doing this job for like 30, 35, 40 odd years, and they've grown it to a level that is turning over, 15, 20 million maybe, and it's a great company, but they've obviously taken so long to get there. And they've not really earned great money off the back of it in getting to that point. So obviously some of these people that we've spoken to, they're sort of the retirement age now, and some of them might sell up and get a few million for the business or whatever if they're lucky, and I suppose they can go and retire in their sort of old age and, well, do whatever it is that they want to do. But to get to that point, it's such a long journey, such a marathon to get there, that I think the key thing I didn't realise was how easy acquisitions actually is. I just presumed it was large companies that you read about on BBC News that are making acquisitions, and it just, if you're a small sort of company, medium-sized company, the acquisitions are very hard because, let's face it, who has millions of pounds to acquire the competition? Yes, it makes perfect sense, because if you could buy another company the same size of yours, well, there's so much synergy there, and you've got two companies come together and suddenly you've got twice the size, and it's like a 10-year growth plan, that. So it's like, if that can happen overnight, that makes so much more sense. But I didn't realize how easy acquisitions are. I mean, you've taught me obviously to acquire some great companies for, well, pretty much no money in some cases, and the ones that we've paid some money for is obviously we bought some fantastic companies, absolutely brilliant companies. I've learned a lot from those companies, but it's all becoming under our umbrella now. But had you not taught me what would you refer it to as, the clever accounting, the clever sort of legal entities that you can structure a business and how you can release cash into the business on day one, do you think that, well, it was one of the first things you got me to do. And I still don't fully understand the accounting side of things. I'll never be an accountant, but it's obviously very clever what you managed to do to release that cash back into the business. And obviously when you've released cash back into the business, well, I think we went from having, probably a small five-figure sum in our sort of operating income at one period of time to, well, what was it, it was a fair few $100,000 you released in the first few months or so, wasn't it? But it was great because obviously some of that went back into our own business, but a lot of it went then towards how we can grow and expand through acquisitions. And every acquisition is obviously very different, but there's no way on earth I would have thought that was possible, till obviously now having worn the t-shirt and seen how easy it actually is. But I suppose you've got to be there, you've got to learn it, you've got to understand it before you have that mentality. Or maybe it's just me, I don't know.
Sorry, Benjamin, I had a mouthful of coffee when you finished talking then. So, yes, growing a business by way of acquisition is clearly perhaps a quicker route to getting to where you want to be. But I guess that some people that will be listening to this interview might be a little bit concerned about how you actually go about financing an acquisition. Perhaps you could just share your journey in terms of how you've been able to finance these acquisitions that you've made.
The bigger acquisitions have been financed through the improvements in our own cash flow. To release such a large amount of money within the first 12 months, I wasn't expecting, but then what it actually cost to acquire, even though they were the two large acquisitions that we had, of course, huge firms within what they do, longevity of trading, what we ended up paying for them, I was surprised. I just presumed companies sell for multi-millions of pounds, and they clearly don't. And then obviously there was the private equity side of things that you've helped me with to raise finance to acquire companies. Again, I didn't even know what private equity meant 10 years ago, but it's just made everything so easily possible to secure more growth, more profitability within the business, and I suppose less risk, if anything, from just going from recruiting within one sector to now owning different firms, being able to recruit every different sector. It's sort of a really safe investment now that we've not got all our eggs in one basket, which is really great.
So, how many acquisitions have you actually made, and realistically, what sort of impact has that had on your business?
So in the last 12 months, obviously, we've pulled off two major other acquisitions of other recruitment firms, and they are big ones based on who it was that we obviously acquired and the levels of their business. But that obviously gave great platforms into new sectors that we had never recruited for before. But then there becomes so much synergy between the clients we've got, the clients they've got. We can now provide not just property related recruitment services. There's the whole host of, well, you might be a property related business, but you've got an IT department. We can now recruit your IT staff for you, and so on and so forth. So those two acquisitions were the key acquisitions for me, in terms of how much that's grown our business, and now the full platform of services that we can offer to potential customers is absolutely brilliant. And obviously we have acquired that software company as well, which gives us great control over our own in-house software that we have. It just made so much sense. It's not something I would have even thought of doing. My business model is all about recruitment, but obviously to be a recruiter you need decent software, and obviously that's a profitable business in itself. And I think it's probably worth mentioning the sort of smaller little outfits that we've obviously not so much bought the business, but we've probably sort of in a way bought the good parts off them, haven't we? So one to mention, obviously only had two members of staff. One was his wife and then an administrator, and I think they had a great foothold within the survey department, which is something we had been doing as a business but not been doing very well. And the reason behind that is we just didn't have the relationships in place that they did. So we sort of almost acquired their trading history, and that suddenly gave us a hell of a lot of contracts in place to go and recruit people that we know how to recruit anyway. We just had that missing piece of the puzzle. So those acquisitions are obviously very different again. I didn't realise things like that even happened, but it just made perfect sense for us at the time, of course, to add another facet into our business.
Benjamin, as always, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks ever so much for sharing your insights.